Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining today's discussion centered on newly released research from the Bipartisan Policy Center and the Center for Social Development at Washington University. This research takes a close look at several key provisions of the Secure 2.0 Act of 2022 and examines policy opportunities to bolster adoption and maximize their impact. We want to express our gratitude to the Prudential Foundation for their generous support of this work. My name is Letty Nocera, and I'm the director of the American Savings Education Council at the Bipartisan Policy Center. I'd like to thank all of our ASEC partners and everyone tuning in today. We're excited for an excellent program, which will be kicked off momentarily by Saurabh Kohli. Saurabh is a program officer at Prudential Financial, where he helps drive the company's strategic philanthropy. In his role, Sora manages partnerships with nonprofit organizations that are enabling more people to build wealth. The ultimate goal of Sorab's portfolio is to help families and communities achieve financial dignity and intergenerational prosperity. Once Sorab concludes his opening remarks, we'll have a presentation from Matt Despard. Matt is a consultant with the Center for Social Development at Washington University and an adjunct assistant professor at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. An expert on the intersection of employment and financial health, financial technology, social welfare and tax policy, and household financial well-being among low and moderate income households, Matt has taught graduate courses in social work for 17 years. Following Matt's presentation, he will be joined by Emerson Sprick for a conversation about the findings. Emerson is an economist and associate director of economic policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center, where he leads the organization's work on retirement security. His areas of expertise include Social Security and other social insurance programs, retirement and financial security policy, and the labor market. We're thrilled to have the combined expertise of Saurabh, Matt, and Emerson to help us better understand the implications of this research. Please feel free to use the Q&A function throughout the discussion, and we will leave time at the end to answer your questions. You're also welcome to use the chat function to share resources and comments, but please note that won't be monitored for questions. And finally, a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on BPC's site in the coming days. And with that, I am thrilled to hand things over to Saurabh. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Letty. Really appreciate being here today. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Saurabh Kohli. I'm a program officer at Prudential. I help lead Prudential's national philanthropic strategy to promote inclusive wealth building opportunities for families across the United States, especially those with low or moderate income. The aim of the strategy is to see more people own and benefit from appreciating assets like residential and commercial real estate, investments in the capital markets, and even ownership stakes in the companies they work for. Also central to our strategy is workplace benefits and retirement savings. Next to home ownership, retirement savings are the second largest driver of household wealth in this country. Through Prudential's philanthropic efforts and our 150 years of work as a purpose-driven company focused on financial security, we believe everyone in this country deserves a restful and secure retirement and more accessible solutions that make it easier to live better longer. We are very proud to partner with the Center for Social Development at the Washington University in St. Louis and the Bipartisan Policy Center. We're very excited for today's discussion about key provisions from the Secure 2.0 Act. As many of you know, Congress passed this noteworthy bipartisan legislation at the end of 2022, which was a historic moment of collaboration between lawmakers, industry, and academics to bolster the U.S. retirement system and better support the financial security of workers. From small technical corrections to significant policy changes, Secure 2.0's provisions, many of which just took effect this year, will expand participation and boost savings in workplace retirement plans. The research that Matt and Emerson will discuss today will focus on three of Secure 2.0's most promising provisions. First, the requirement of new plans to implement automatic features. Second, the creation of emergency savings accounts that are connected to workplace retirement accounts. And third, the Savers Match, a program that will provide matching government contributions into retirement accounts. I really look forward to the research, presentation, and discussion. With that, I'll turn things back over to Letty.
Thank you, Saurabh. Again, very much appreciate your support. I will now welcome Matt to share his slides and start his presentation.
Great, thanks, Letty, and thanks so much, Sorb, for the introduction to kick us off. I'm Matt Despard. I'm with the Center for Social Development at Washington University in St. Louis, and I am thrilled to be here. This is hot off the press. These are findings that, in fact, I was just kind of cranking out about 15 minutes before the webinar. So we received a generous support from Prudential Foundation to include a module in the Wave 2 survey of a larger project that allowed us to focus on a set of questions regarding the Secure 2.0 Act provisions. And this larger project is the Workforce Economic Inclusion and Mobility Project, which is supported generously by the JP Morgan Chase Foundation. And before I begin, I also want to acknowledge my colleague, Stephen Roll, with CSD, who is the principal investigator for this project, and Guangli Zhang, who has assisted with data analysis. I also want to mention just real quickly, Center for Social Development will be sharing with the public a set of 4 research briefs to go into even greater detail than I'm about to with our findings. So our aim of this study was to focus on and understand how lower wage workers may be affected by certain provisions of the Secure 2.0 Act, including automatic features, emergency savings, and the Savers Match, which will replace the Savers Credit starting in 2027. Now, as a starting point, more than a third of lower wage workers who work full or part-time for an employer have no retirement savings whatsoever. When we conducted the survey, we discovered that 61% of employees have access to an employer-sponsored retirement plan, or ESRP for short, with an 80% take-up rate, which is rather good. So automatic enrollment may boost this take-up rate. And currently, about 60% of plans have automatic enrollment, and I'm sure we will see that tick up with new plans coming online under Secure 2.0. Now, on the other hand, offering a plan itself remains optional for employers. And over half of those employees without access to an ESRP have $0 in retirement savings. So whether Secure 2.0 broadly impacts access among lower wage workers is an open question. And the issue of access is clearly demonstrated in this slide, with the $0 savings being much higher among those without access. Concerning auto escalation, over half of employees with an employee-sponsored retirement program already have access to auto escalation. Now, when we asked workers what they would do if their employer began offering auto escalation, 41% said they would allow it to proceed. They would not fundamentally opt out. Yet an entire 38%, more than a third, said they weren't sure what they would do. And the opt-out and don't know responses are actually lower among workers with ESRP access. So workers who already have access to a retirement plan are less likely to opt out, or less likely to say they wouldn't know what they would do with auto escalation. Now, the opt-out, it's also important to think of other options employers have for increasing contributions among employees. The obvious case is with employer matches for retirement savings. And so we found that employees are less likely to make contributions if their employer was not offering a match. So that opt-out rate of auto escalation may be higher among employees who do not offer a match. We found that employees are generally favorable to emergency savings, more so if they were hypothetically offered a match by their employer. Yet the anchor amount, either they choose an amount that they would save or receive an anchor of 3% or 5%, that did not seem to affect the likelihood that they would participate in an emergency savings program. And it was also interesting to note that this likelihood was unrelated to workers' current situation with emergency and retirement savings. So in other words, workers who said they had no current emergency savings were just as likely to say they would enroll in an emergency savings program with their employer as those who already have emergency savings. So we find that very encouraging. And then lastly, just over 10% of workers said that if they were enrolled in an emergency savings account program, that they would be less likely to save for retirement. Now, we found that most workers said they were likely to claim the Savers Match. And the likelihood is greater, however, among employees who already have a set of social and economic advantages, such as being banked, such as having $500 or more in liquid non-retirement savings, those who have a college degree or higher, full-time employees, and so forth. Now, lastly, we found that the likelihood of claiming the match is greater among those who already have a retirement savings account and who already have money saved for retirement. And that's been a theme throughout our findings, is that the various provisions of Secure 2.0 have a greater response among workers who are already saving for retirement. So a few conclusions from these findings. A certain degree of uncertainty about auto escalation, what that opt-out rate might be. It would certainly be lower, we think, among employees who already have access to a retirement plan at work. But matches are more consistently predictive of whether or not employees will contribute higher amounts. So even outside of Secure 2.0, it remains true that employers who offer higher level matches, 5%, 6%, will see employee contributions follow that. And part of that's because it's not just the incentive, but it's also acts as an anchor for employees concerning how much they should be saving for retirement. Pretty good interest in emergency savings accounts. Perhaps not a whole lot of effect on retirement saving with employees who participate in emergency savings. And again, in general, the responses to various provisions tend to be correlated with greater financial security. And so that leads me to conclude that what we're looking at is perhaps among the lower wage workforce, kind of three tiers of potential benefits from Secure 2.0. As I've been alluding to, in the top tier are those workers who already have access to employer-sponsored retirement plans. And it's an open question as to the degree to which Secure 2.0 will actually entice more employers to begin offering these plans. There are some incentives for small businesses, for instance. Now, the next tier would be lower wage workers who do not have access to a retirement plan at work, but who live in one of the 20 states that offer public retirement savings programs, especially the 17 of those that offer auto enrollment. And then the lowest tier would be the workers who are in the 30 other states. And those are workers who don't have access to a retirement plan at work, who are in one of the 30 states that do not have public retirement savings programs. So again, that's just kind of a quick run through of some of our top line findings from this study. And forthcoming, we will have 4 briefs that go into considerably greater detail than I have here. But at this point, I would like to invite my colleague Emerson Sprick with the Bipartisan Policy Center to join me here on the virtual stage so we can have a bit more of a conversation about these findings.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, the survey has, I think, some really interesting results, and I'm looking forward to spending the next 45 minutes or so talking through some of the implications, particularly those implications for policymakers that come from these results. I'll flag right now that Matt, you and I, and our colleague Stephen, who you mentioned, just today published a longer brief looking into these issues. These 3 specific provisions of Secure 2.0, automatic enrollment, emergency savings, and the Savers Match. My colleague Sonia just put that in the chat, I believe, or if not, she will shortly. And so, we that report not only, looks into and explores some of the findings from this survey that you at CSD have done, but also looks at some of the broader implications for Secure 2.0 looking forward, and also, the kinds of policies that Secure 2.0 or a Secure 2.0 type policy can't necessarily address. Looking at things like expanding, like closing the access gap, and like making sure that for those who slip through the cracks, there is a robust social insurance system through Social Security. So we probably won't touch on that in the next 40 minutes, but I did want to mention that our report gets into all of those details, and I'm really looking forward to reading the kind of area-specific briefs that you all at CSD have coming out. Before we get started, I'll just say, BPC has been working on these issues for over a decade. We played a significant role as an organization in the development of both the Secure Act of 2019 and Secure 2.0 in 2022. And having this kind of data not only helps folks like us make sure that the ongoing implementation of Secure 2.0 is rolling out smoothly, but also helps inform the conversations that have already started about a Secure 3.0 package, right? Some people hate calling it Secure 3.0. I think it makes a lot of sense. So, at some point there will be another, big retirement security package. And I think that's a great part of federal policy right now. A lot of federal policy is done on a partisan basis, especially right now. But I feel really lucky to be working in this area that is a bastion of bipartisan policymaking. Both Secure and Secure 2.0 passed on extremely bipartisan basis. So one last bit of housekeeping before I get started. I just want to reiterate the point that for anyone listening, please put questions in the Q&A feature throughout the conversation, and we will get to those as we can. Matt, to kind of the conversation here, I want to start talking about access. And WashU's survey shows that 41% of the people in your sample don't have access to an employer-sponsored retirement plan. I think one thing that I'd like to clarify right off the bat is just why these kinds of workplace plans are so important when you can just go and open an IRA, right, for the same purpose. And I think there are really 4 reasons here. One is that contributions are automatically deducted from your paycheck, which is an extremely powerful feature. 2 is that those contributions are invested by default into a balanced, responsible investment fund. And then, 3 and 4, there is this ability for these kinds of workplace plans to automatically enroll eligible participants and automatically escalate their contributions as they, as their tenure extends. You can always opt out of those automatic features, but those are extremely important in driving participation. And so, the access gap that you find in this result in this survey lines up really well with other evidence we have that looks at the fuller population of U.S. workers. But one difference is that the WashU survey doesn't find any association between access to workforce retirement plans and race or ethnicity. And it finds only kind of a weak correlation between access and education level. And that's not the same in the other data that we have. So could you start out by just kind of explaining what's going on there?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And the one major difference is that our sample was not of all workers, but of lower wage workers. And so I think there's a bit of a, hey, we're in the same boat phenomenon going on here. You're right. There was no relationship between a worker's race or ethnicity and access. And that's because one of the reasons is because there was also no relationship between race and ethnicity in the industry in which lower wage workers in our study were employed. So, for example, white and black workers were equally as likely to be employed in hospitality and food services, where the likelihood of having retirement plan access is 44% lower than the average access rate. Now, in contrast, access to retirement plans is closer to the average in healthcare. But that's a broad industry classification. We know the healthcare industry comprises a lot of different types of employers. Now, in a different study, also supported by the Prudential Foundation, we found that access to retirement benefits was much lower among frontline healthcare workers in home health settings, which employ a larger proportion of Black workers, compared to institutional settings such as hospitals. So it's important to know that there's some within industry variation to understand in terms of the type, the size of employers. Now you may wonder, well, what does that have to do with education? So workers in our study that had college degrees were almost 20% more likely to have access to retirement benefits. As you said,
Wow.
not a super strong correlation, but something. Now workers without degrees happen to be a bit more concentrated in employers that do not offer retirement benefits like we see in food services. So the access it varies with respect to both industry and education, and sometimes kind of an interaction between the two. So let me think about it this way, just to use a really concrete example. If you are a food services worker without a college degree, in terms of access to retirement plans, you are much better off working in a hospital cafeteria than at the restaurant around the corner from the hospital.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think that, part of the way of thinking about this in the first part of your answer there is that by restricting the sample to lower earning workers, you're essentially controlling for earnings. And so, the other data that show really strong effects of race and ethnicity and education on access to these plans, the underlying factor there might well be income itself and just the kind of sorting effects of different types of folks into different income buckets. And so I think that, I think that I have a related question, because you also find that, access to one of these workplace retirement plans has a strong positive correlation with the amount that is saved for retirement. And
Sure.
so there's some underlying differences there in terms of the jobs that are most likely to offer these plans versus those that aren't, right? These are all low income workers. And so you might not expect to see huge variation in amounts saved across your sample. But can you kind of extend what you were just saying, not just to access, but to the amount saved?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if your employer offers you a benefit that otherwise you might not have sought out on your own, in this case, retirement savings, they give you a financial incentive, and after you enroll, your contributions are deducted from your paycheck. Uh, there's a ton less friction in that scenario than if you were to, as a lower wage worker, venture out on your own to find retirement savings options. So just a consistent theme, not only in this study, but the decades of research at the Center for Social Development we've been doing on wealth building, is that institutions matter. In this case, employers. Institutions, employers, financial services providers, they play a really important role in facilitating retirement saving, and particularly when you sprinkle in some tax incentives. But the question is, if you look at the distribution of lower wage workers, what does that distribution look like in terms of access to the many wonderful things that employers provide with respect to institutional support?
Right. Right. I want to switch gears a little bit away from the access gap and toward the three Secure 2.0 provisions that we've really focused on in our partnership over the past 6 or 8 months. And the first part of that is automatic features. There was a really important paper released last spring, I think, by some of the leading researchers on this issue. And it showed that perhaps auto escalation, in particular, the automatic increase of contributions to a retirement plan among participants each year of employment, perhaps that has less of an effect than many of us thought. But a lot of that reduced effect is due to kind of employees' behavior at job transitions upon departing from one employer and, when beginning a new job. And so could you talk a little bit about whether you think that any of the provisions within Secure 2.0 are going to address that weakness in that job transition period?
Wow, I love the question because it's so important to remember that work is not static. That people make several job changes
Yeah.
um, throughout the course of their careers, and there's more churn in jobs, particularly at the lower end of the wage distribution. So it's really a pertinent question. So there, no doubt, there are some really great plan portability provisions of Secure 2.0. It's just there's a ton less friction involved in taking your plan and rolling that over to a new employer's plan if they offer that, or to an IRA. So that's a great thing. But when it comes to automatic features, when an employee leaves a job, their current contribution level, and whether or not they are auto escalating their contributions, that does not carry over. The plan
Yeah.
features do not carry over to their new employer's plan. Of course, that's assuming that the new employer even offers a plan.
Right.
So if an employee was contributing 7% after a few years of auto escalation, if they change job, they may fall back to 3% with the new employer who may or may not offer auto escalation. or worse, they can fall back to 0% because the new employer doesn't offer a plan.
Right. Yeah, that I think that's a really good point about the portability provisions that were in Secure 2.0. And look, Secure 2.0 included a ton of provisions. Um, I think BPC has an explainer on kind of outlining all of the major provisions, at least from our perspective, that were in that. And I'll have I'll ask my colleague to put that in the chat for everyone to look at. But there still is that weakness at the job transition period. And I think there's still work to be done looking ahead from a policy perspective there. But moving on to the emergency savings side of this, someone who registered, had the opportunity to leave a comment or a question and left a comment suggesting that emergency savings potentially represents a form of plan leakage. And for folks who don't know what that means, because it's an extremely weird term that we use as like a technical term, it just means money that comes out of retirement accounts that should stay in retirement accounts, or perhaps in this situation, money that doesn't go into retirement accounts in the first place that should be going into retirement accounts. And so, this is how the Joint Committee on Taxation views emergency savings. In Secure 2.0, the expansion of emergency savings was scored as a revenue raiser because it, in JCT's mind, diverted money out of tax-advantaged retirement accounts into much less tax-advantaged emergency savings accounts. A lot of folks don't think that is the reality of the situation, that in fact, emergency savings can bring people into the financial system, can make people feel more comfortable in tying up money for the long run. But I wondered if you had any thoughts on that, on emergency savings as a source of plan leakage.
Well, the workers in our study, only 11% thought that were they to participate in an emergency savings program at work and make payroll deducted contributions, that meant that they might save less for retirement. And I think what that speaks to is that when an employer, again, is providing that institutional support to facilitate both types of saving, there isn't necessarily a crowd out effect. And here's the thing, the power of payroll deduction. Okay. Yeah. So if you've got two types of savings going on, automatically deducted from your paycheck, prior economic research shows that we all tend to adjust our consumption around our available resources. And the amounts over time that are being deducted for both types of savings, in a sense, become imperceptible, and workers are then adjusting their consumption around that margin of income less they have in their paycheck that's now going to saving. But on the other hand, this whole structure empowers workers to at any time opt out. So if the imperceptible becomes perceptible, right, and people really start to feel some pain, then they can opt out. And Secure 2.0, I think, does a really nice job of offering a little leeway for sorry to say, some plan leakage, so that the hardship withdrawals. And so I'm glad to see that. None of us want to see plan leakage, but we found in our study that more than a third of lower wage workers in the last month, their expenses exceeded their income. So the larger economic headwinds are things like rising housing costs, rising healthcare costs, and so forth. So that is going to exert a certain amount of pressure against either type of saving, particularly when you're trying to meet basic needs. But again, I'll fall back to the position that institutions matter, and if we can help workers save automatically for both types of saving, I think that's a great thing. And I think the results will be generally better than worse.
I think a comprehensive review of the literature and the data available so far shows two things really clearly. One, that most folks want to save more than they're currently saving, and they will if it's easy. And
Yeah.
two, folks know where their money is going. And so, even when automatic enrollment is in place, and automatic escalation is in place, you see, for instance, in the state automatic IRA programs, fairly high opt-out rates. And to
Sure.
me, that's good news because it shows that, this population of mostly low earning workers who, perhaps are, changing jobs more than average, they know that sometimes they can be saving and sometimes they can't. And when they can't, they
Yeah.
opt out. So they don't end up having that kind of unexpected shortfall. So, that's been my read of the kind of research and data over the past 6 months or so. And I think those are both really optimistic signs. I want to move on to the Savers Match a little bit. And I want to give a little bit of background. So in 2027, the Savers Match is replacing the Savers Credit. Both of these are providing tax advantages, tax incentives to low-income folks who save in qualified retirement accounts. The Savers Credit, which is currently in place, is claimed by fewer than 6% of tax filers. The average credit is $191. And this is largely because there's extremely low awareness of the credit and it's non-refundable, which means
Yeah.
it's essentially worthless for folks with no federal income tax liability, which is a huge proportion of the workers and tax filers for whom this is intended. And so the Savers Match, which is coming online in 2027, would provide matching funds for those qualified retirement contributions directly into a retirement plan for these filers. That solves the non-refundability issue, assuming that we can get the implementation of this right. But it doesn't necessarily address the lack of awareness. And so the findings from CSD's survey suggests that low-wage workers will likely claim the Savers Match, or way more likely to claim the Savers Match than they are the Savers Credit. But how resilient do you think that finding is to that widespread lack of awareness?
Not very. Let me go into a little bit more detail. So when we disaggregate that finding, look, we find that the workers who are already making retirement contributions, already making those retirement contributions, are 3 to 4 times more likely to say that they'll claim the Savers Match. And so let's just kind of run through a little scenario. So let's say you aren't already saving, you don't have access to a workplace plan for retirement. When are you most likely to learn about the match? It's when you file your taxes.
Yeah.
And it's, you can't claim it then because you haven't been saving.
That's right.
At that point, here's what needs to happen. You need to say, you know what, I think it would be good for me to start saving for retirement, so that next year I can claim that awesome Savers Match. And I'm going to have to, find the retirement options on my own and make sure the one that I pick is one that'll qualify for the match. So fundamentally here, this is a really different, when we talk about refundable credits, the outreach scenario here is dramatically different than other refundable credits. So think about the earned income tax credit and the refundable portion of the child tax credit. Now people are going about their business throughout the year. They're doing things like having kids, caring for their kids, and they're working. Very, very, usual routine types of things. So then it comes to tax time, and most of us are using tax software or getting the help of a paid preparer. And then voila, we discover that we get to claim this refundable credit. And that, if you asked the total number of people who received the earned income tax credit, hey, do you get the earned income tax credit? I bet a not insignificant portion will be like, what's that? I've never heard of that. But they do know they get a tax refund.
Right.
So we have to think about how the Savers Match interacts with the tax filing process, and how do people respond to information at what points in time and with what institutional support or lack thereof.
Yeah, certainly work to be done on the awareness, but not just, PSA style awareness, really trying to figure
Right.
out how to convey that information, that this behavior that we want you to engage in throughout the year is important at tax time, right?
Yeah.
So we got a registrant question that I want to address real quick about this topic, and we've touched on it, but it was essentially, are federal contributions via the Savers Match going to be made automatically without any action from plan participants? And would it be so? But unfortunately, that's not the case, right? Just like the Savers credit, folks are going to have to, claim the Savers Match. And there's an additional layer of complication here that I think really is going to need to get worked out before 2027. And I think it's worth going into a little bit here. So to lay the groundwork, there are essentially two types of retirement accounts. There are Roth accounts and there are traditional accounts. Traditional accounts are what we
Yeah.
think of. You put in money pre-tax, and when you take it out, it's taxed. Roth accounts are the inverse. You pay tax on your income, you put it in a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k, and then when you take it out in retirement, it's tax-free. The problem is that Roth accounts, which are the accounts that are generally most advantageous to lower earners, the folks who are kind of the target audience for the Savers credit, Roth accounts are not eligible for Savers matching funds. And so what that means is
Yeah.
that if someone in one of the state automatic IRA programs, for example, which all use Roth IRAs as their default, contributes to that Roth IRA throughout the year, claims the Savers Match, he or she won't be able to receive it unless they also open a traditional IRA account. And so, that's a huge amount of friction to introduce into this system. And it's one that I understand the thinking behind it. Roth money in Roth accounts is much more liquid than money in traditional accounts. You can generally withdraw things without taxes and penalties to a greater extent than you can make withdrawals early before retirement from traditional accounts. But there are ways around that on a regulatory basis, and we explain that in the research paper that we published today. But I thought that was really important to cover, because that's a huge question mark in, as we come up on 2027, the efficacy
Sure.
of the Savers Match. Before I move on to a couple concluding kind of big picture questions, I wanted to remind everyone listening and watching to submit questions, please, in the Q&A. I've only got a couple questions left, so we will be sure to get to some. We'd love to hear the questions that you all have and do our best to answer those. Big picture questions, Matt. What does you said that these results come from a Secure 2.0 module and in a greater survey that your team has been working on. The results from this module, what do they suggest is the policy change on, a federal level that would have the biggest impact on retirement security preparedness for this population?
Wow. Not an easy question. I'm going to approach this with a certain degree of uncertainty. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Emerson. You're more the policy expert than I. So I'll judge by your reaction. Well, but okay. So here are just a few things that maybe we could consider. First of all, the match rate on the Savers match. Maybe we kick that up to a 1-to-1 match. And for IRA contributions and Roth IRA contributions, so we can work out that mechanism to help make up for the fact that workers without workplace retirement plan access, the fact that they're missing out on employer matches.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a bit of a compensatory move we can make. What you're just describing, coordinating Savers match claims with state savings programs, and allowing the Savers match to be deposited into Roth accounts. And then I think lastly, and you mentioned this early on in your comments, and it's so important. It's perhaps the most important thing out of all of this work is that, at the end of the day, despite our best efforts, the distribution of access to employer-sponsored retirement plans and other tax incentivized retirement savings options is not across the board. It's everybody doesn't get to receive the same level of access. So I think that means that we have to come back to Social Security and look at are there mechanisms for adjusting Social Security retirement benefits for workers who lacked access to employer-sponsored retirement plans during their working years.
Yeah, Social Security is such an important part of this discussion, especially over the long term. It's something that I work on a lot. I wish had the same pattern of bipartisan progress as private sector retirement policy, but unfortunately it doesn't. And so, the Social Security Trust Fund is projected to be depleted in 2033. At that point, the benefit money that goes out can only match the payroll tax revenues that come in the door. And that means that those benefit payments are going to have to be reduced one way or another by 20 to 25%, starting in 2033. We've known about this issue for a very long time. And it's one of the, it's the third rail of American politics. It's something that policymakers simply haven't tackled since 1983. And so, the Bipartisan Policy Center has been working on this for a long time. We convened a bipartisan commission in 2016 that released, 11 or 12 separate recommendations that if it had been implemented at the time, it would have made the program sustainably solvent. It would have bolstered income for beneficiaries at the bottom end of the income spectrum. And it would have done it with a fairly even balance of kind of tax adjustments and benefit adjustments. Those choices are harder now. Those adjustments have to be bigger now. And that's only going to become more the case as we get closer to 2033. And so it's extremely important that we figure out what we're going to do with Social Security in the next few years. I'll just add, to this point and this population that we're talking about today, a cornerstone of BPC's Social Security reform proposal is what we call the basic minimum benefit. And it's really just bringing Social Security into the 21st century, setting a level of benefits where we say, okay, if you have worked for 40 years, you're at least going to get this amount, right? No more $56 a month benefit checks because you've kind of had a sporadic working career, you've been low income your entire career. And that, you can structure that basic minimum benefit in a way that preserves incentives to continue working if you're able, right? So there are ways to go about this without just raising taxes, cutting benefits across the board. And I think it's incredibly important for folks to do that, for folks to recognize the importance of that, and talk about that to a greater extent, right? I'll add one more question, and then hopefully some questions will come in through the Q&A feature. Please send us your questions, everyone. We just changed administrations, Congresses. And so, how do you see the implementation of Secure 2.0 changing? How do you see the outlook for Secure 3.0 changing? Is there anything you're concerned about or hopeful about?
Yeah, so I think it's important to recognize that there's a certain degree of intersection between the Secure 2.0 Act and fiscal policy.
Yeah.
Right. So it's unavoidable. And so we know that the budget resolution that the Trump administration wanted and that recently passed the House um, uh, is proposing to extend tax cuts that, if left to expire, would result in less take-home pay for lower wage workers that ostensibly could be used to save for retirement and take advantage of various Secure 2.0 provisions. Now that's maybe one side of the coin. Now another side of the coin is that that same resolution calls for some pretty steep spending cuts, and, particularly focusing on Medicaid at $880 billion.
Right.
Now in our study, here's the thing though: almost 30% of our workers, people who are working in our study, receive Medicaid. Okay. And it could be different reasons. They're working part-time, their employer doesn't offer a health plan, they're self-employed, and so on. So the Medicaid cuts will most certainly initially target Medicaid expansion, which added a lot of these workers to the Medicaid rolls. So that will translate most likely into increased healthcare costs for these workers, which could perhaps more than wipe out the tax break
Yeah.
they're getting, and begin to crowd out retirement saving. So it means we just have to have kind of a clear idea of how these decisions are going to shift around the consumption basket for lower wage workers. You take $1 here for retirement,
Right.
and then $2 comes out over here for healthcare.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll add on. I'll say, when it comes to the momentum behind continued policy like Secure 2.0, I'm actually fairly optimistic. I think a much bigger setback than anything related to a new Congress or a new administration is actually the recent retirements of a couple of the senators in particular who were the real, true, longtime leaders of these efforts. Senator Portman, Senator Cardin, right? Those were big losses for the retirement security policy world. But I think there are a lot of indications that there are, the bench is deep on this issue, and there are plenty of folks who are willing to take up that mantle, not to mention, putting aside the folks on the House side who we haven't seen as much turnover there. And so I think the chances are really good of another really comprehensive, really productive omnibus retirement legislation, retirement package in not this year, maybe late 2026, maybe 2027, but I think it's coming down the pike. I think it'll happen. We got a question from the chat, and we'll have time for one or two more if anyone else wants to put questions in the chat. And I'm happy to take this one. I don't know how much, Matt, you look into things like this, but what trends are you seeing with regard to annuities in retirement plans? Secure 2.0 and the Secure Act both really helped, enacted some policy changes that made it easier to implement protected income products, annuity-like products, in defined contribution plans. And so are we seeing trends? Are we seeing shifts there?
Oh, Emerson, I'm going to totally leave that up to you.
Okay. Yeah. So, this is a huge topic of conversation in the retirement policy think tank industry world right now. I'll say that we have seen movement. I think all of the major financial institutions, BlackRock, TIAA, JPM, they've all come out with, they've all produced products that are meant to, annuitize some assets within DC plans, that are meant to provide that protected income product within retirement plans. There's a lot of work to be done, but I'm not sure, and I don't think anyone is sure yet, if the work that's left to be done is on the policy side or on the product side. I think that there are a lot of policy protections, like this person with his question mentioned, for at least the concept of wrapping these products into DC plans. But where's the consumer demand for that is, I think, the biggest question. We know that folks want these kinds of products. We know that folks feel like they're kind of out at sea when they go from their working lives accumulating assets into retirement, and then they've just got a pot of money and they don't know what to do with it. And too many people take required minimum distributions, which were never intended as guidance for what you should do, as their drawdown strategy to determine, how much income they're taking each month, each year. That's clearly suboptimal. And when you ask people, do they want a product that turns that pot of money into a guaranteed income stream, they say yes. But if you ask them if they want an annuity, they say no. Because annuities, I think, have a really bad reputation. And so I think there's still a lot of policy work to be done. Rather, a lot of product work to be done. There's clearly some policy work that remains to be done in terms of getting plan sponsors, employers who offer retirement plans, fully comfortable with the idea of their default investments being target date funds that have a guaranteed income component. But we're seeing movement, right? I think we're seeing movement in the right direction. It's a huge topic of conversation. I think there's progress being made, and there will be more progress made in a Secure 3.0. So with that, I think we're getting close to out of time. Matt, is there anything you wanted to add that we didn't cover?
I just wanted to comment on one of the last comments you made, your optimism about Secure 2.0 moving forward with the change in administration in Congress. And here's what it is. It's that I in this age of sharp disagreements about a whole host of policy issues, I think one thing that we established more than 60 years ago, and that remains true today, is that we really don't want to be a country that sees its older adults suffer. Yeah. And I think that's just such a bedrock value. So I'm with you. I'm optimistic that if we can kind of center that as the shared interest, and then we can quibble about the fiscal and implementation details.
Right.
So I think that's just an excellent point.
Great. Well, Matt, it's been so great to work with you and the team at CSD on the report that we just released. We've got some other products from both us and from you, continuing to come out over the coming weeks. Really looking forward to that. Want to again extend a thank you to the Prudential Foundation, to the WashU team for your support of this work. And thanks so much for sharing your insight with us today.
Thank you, Emerson. This has been fantastic, and so happy for Center for Social Development to be working with Bipartisan Policy Center on all this great work.
Great. Well, Letty, I will turn it back over to you for a quick closing remark.
Great, thank you, Emerson. I'm going to make it very quick, and I think you and Matt just summarized everything very, very well. So just, we really encourage all of you to take a look at the brief, and as Emerson mentioned, we will be coming out with additional products in the coming weeks. but really want to thank everyone that took the time to join this call today. I know many of you have done great work also to lay the foundation for improvements that we can make to the very significant bipartisan achievement of Secure 2.0. So we look forward to continuing these conversations. And again, thank you everyone for your time.